Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're exploring How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. This book has sold over 10 million copies, and it's almost a century old. We're going to look into why it's remained so popular. Get ready for some pretty surprising insights.
You know, it's fascinating. This book was published back in 1937, and it was an instant success. And even today, it's still selling really well. It's a testament to its timeless appeal. Carnegie really tapped into this fundamental human need, understanding people and, of course, building those relationships.
It's interesting. The book didn't start as a guide to winning friends. Carnegie was actually focused on public speaking first.
That's right. But as he was teaching, he noticed his students were craving something more. They wanted to know how to handle those relationships, how to build rapport, and just, connect with people on a much deeper level. A survey actually done by the University of Chicago and the YMCA confirmed this. People ranked understanding people as a top priority, right after health.
So Carnegie stumbled upon this gold mine of human need and decided to explore it further. And one of the most striking things he argues is the futility of criticism. He uses these really vivid examples like notorious criminals, Al Capone and Two Gun Crowley, who just refuse to accept blame for their actions.
It's these extreme cases that highlight a universal truth. Criticism often leads to defensiveness, even resentment, rather than, positive change. And there's that quote from John Wanamaker. He said, "I have enough trouble overcoming my own limitations without fretting over the fact that God has not seen fit to distribute evenly the gift of intelligence." It captures perfectly our tendency to justify our actions.
Even when we're in the wrong.
Exactly.
Carnegie also brings up Lincoln criticizing General Meade after the Battle of Gettysburg. Even though Meade won, Lincoln felt he missed an opportunity. But instead of, motivating Meade, the criticism just made him want to defend his actions even more.
And that illustrates a key takeaway for us. Criticism rarely inspires improvement. Instead of focusing on what people do wrong, maybe we should consider emphasizing appreciation.
Oh, absolutely.
Appreciation, according to Carnegie, is it's like legal tender that all souls enjoy. It's all about showing genuine interest in others and acknowledging those positive qualities. Actions often speak louder than words, and Carnegie illustrates this beautifully in Father Forgets, where a father realizes he's been way too critical of his son, and he's been overlooking his good qualities.
It's a reminder for all of us to, focus on the good in others and to express appreciation much more often. Carnegie highlights the story of Stevie Morris, a blind boy whose life was transformed. When his teacher recognized his exceptional hearing, instead of focusing on his limitations, she appreciated his unique abilities.
Yeah, that's the thing. These stories highlight the universal need for appreciation, sincere appreciation in all relationships. And moving beyond just appreciation, Carnegie looks at other strategies for building connections, like the power of remembering names.
Oh yes, he's got these incredible anecdotes about people with almost superhuman name-remembering abilities. Like Jim Farley, a politician during Roosevelt's presidency, knew over 50,000 people by their first names.
50,000, that's just wow. But it wasn't just a good memory. Farley had a system. He would learn details about people, like their family, their jobs, even their political opinions, all to help create this mental picture and remember them better.
He even used this during Roosevelt's campaign, sending personalized letters to thousands of people. That level of personalized attention really makes people feel valued.
Absolutely. It shows genuine interest, and that's essential for building strong relationships. Carnegie also shares the story of a salesman, Sid Livy, who went the extra mile to remember this difficult name, Nicodemus Papadopoulos. You can imagine the impact when he addressed the customer by his full name, a name most people probably simplified. The customer was deeply moved. He said it was the first time in years someone had bothered to learn his real name.
That's a real aha moment, It shows that a small effort like that, remembering a name, can have such a profound impact.
Precisely. It's this simple but powerful way to show respect and appreciation. But remembering names is just one piece of the puzzle. Carnegie also emphasizes the importance of talking in terms of the other person's interests.
He uses this humorous analogy to explain this concept: a stubborn calf refusing to be led into the barn. No amount of pushing or pulling worked until a housemaid understood what the calf desired: to suckle. She let the calf suckle her finger and gently led it right into the barn.
The takeaway here is that we need to understand what motivates the other person. It's not about manipulation, it's about understanding their desires and framing our communication accordingly.
That makes sense. If you want to connect with someone and influence them, you have to speak their language. You have to appeal to their interests.
Exactly, and Carnegie illustrates this brilliantly with a story about a man struggling to negotiate his rent with a hotel manager. Instead of arguing about the price hike, he shifted his perspective and focused on the hotel manager's interests. He even listed the pros and cons of the rent increase from the manager's viewpoint.
So instead of just arguing, he kind of turned it into a problem-solving exercise.
Right, and that change in approach led to a successful negotiation and ultimately a reduced rent.
So shifting your perspective, finding that common ground, can be more effective than just arguing or trying to force your viewpoint.
Absolutely, and this brings us to another powerful technique Carnegie highlights, the yes-yes technique. It's all about getting the other person saying yes early on in the conversation.
I remember this one. It's about finding those points of agreement, even if they seem small, just to create that sense of momentum and avoid those arguments. Carnegie uses that funny anecdote about the car salesman and the customer who loved a competitor's product. Instead of arguing, the salesman agreed with the customer, acknowledged those strong points, then smoothly steered the conversation toward the strengths of his own offering.
Exactly, and this technique is rooted in this psychological principle of momentum building, helps create a more receptive and agreeable atmosphere. It's all about finding that common ground, even when discussing differing opinions.
So instead of a head-on collision of opinions, you're subtly guiding the conversation.
Precisely. And speaking of creating a positive and supportive environment, Carnegie emphasizes the importance of praise and encouragement. He famously says, "Abilities wither under criticism. They blossom under encouragement."
Do you have a favorite example from the book of this in action?
One that always sticks with me is the story of Charles Dickens. You know, he had a tough childhood, faced a lot of rejection early in his writing career. But then one editor praised one of his stories, and this single act of encouragement was enough to change his entire life. It gave him the confidence to keep writing, leading him to become, the literary giant we know today.
Wow, that's incredible, the impact of one act of kindness.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how many potential Charles Dickens are out there just waiting for that spark.
It really does, and Carnegie repeatedly stresses that praise is just crucial for personal growth. It unlocks potential that criticism might stifle.
He also delves into the idea of making people feel important, suggesting that appealing to nobler motives is often more effective than using force or coercion.
Yes, he illustrates this beautifully with the story of John D. Rockefeller Jr., who wanted to stop those photographers from hounding his children. Instead of ordering them to stop, he appealed to their sense of decency as fathers.
That's so much more effective than yelling or threatening legal action.
It is. By appealing to their paternal instincts, he disarmed them and achieved his goal without creating conflict. And this ties into a broader principle Carnegie highlights, the importance of making others feel important. Even powerful figures like Kaiser Wilhelm II craved that recognition and appreciation. It's a universal human need.
It really is. It reminds me of that quote, "Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind, always."
That's a perfect way to put it. It really captures the essence of Carnegie's message. Treating people with respect and understanding isn't just good manners, it's a powerful strategy for building those stronger relationships and achieving your goals. It's interesting how Carnegie emphasizes that making people feel important goes hand in hand with being a good listener.
Yeah, I've noticed that pattern too as we've been talking about this book. It makes sense, right? Like if you're genuinely interested in someone, you're naturally going to be a better listener.
Absolutely, and Carnegie dedicates a significant portion of the book to this art of listening. He argues that it's more than just passively hearing words. It's about actively engaging, showing that genuine interest, and making the other person feel truly understood.
He shares that story about a woman who was constantly complaining to the New York telephone company. She would curse, rave, even threaten lawsuits. It sounds like a customer service nightmare.
It does, but then a customer service representative named Joe did something different. Instead of getting defensive or trying to shut her down, he actually listened to her.
And that simple act of listening changed everything.
It did. The woman calmed down, and they were able to find a resolution. It turned out that all she wanted was to be heard and taken seriously.
It's powerful that sometimes all people need is to feel heard. But it can be challenging to listen patiently when someone is upset or angry.
Absolutely. But Carnegie suggests that letting the other person vent can actually help diffuse the situation. It's like letting steam out of a pressure cooker. By allowing them to express their emotions, you create space for a more rational conversation.
He also talks about the importance of seeing things from the other person's perspective, even if you disagree with them. He calls it climbing into another person's skin and walking around in it.
That's such a vivid image. He uses a really compelling example to illustrate this. A businessman who was furious about a billing error went to the company headquarters ready to unleash his anger.
I can just picture it now, him storming through the doors.
But here's the twist. The executive, instead of getting defensive, listened patiently, apologized for the inconvenience, and thanked the customer for bringing it to his attention.
Wow, that's a surprising response. He didn't try to argue or justify the mistake.
Not at all. He completely disarmed the customer by acknowledging his feelings and taking responsibility. And then he did something even more brilliant. He appealed to the customer's sense of fairness, saying, "I'm going to leave it all up to you. Whatever you say goes."
That's a bold move, but it sounds like it worked.
It did. The customer, caught off guard by this gesture, palmed down and reviewed his bills. He even discovered that he had mislaid one. He ended up sending a check to the company with a letter of apology.
That's a remarkable turnaround. It shows that sometimes the best way to win someone over is to seemingly surrender.
Exactly. And Carnegie emphasizes that this principle applies in all sorts of situations, from business negotiations to personal relationships. The key takeaway here is to approach conflict with a willingness to understand the other person's perspective and find common ground.
So how do we get better at seeing things from another person's point of view? Especially when we're feeling emotional ourselves, it's easy to get caught up in our own perspective.
Carnegie suggests that before you criticize someone, try to understand why they did what they did. What were their motivations? What were they thinking? It's about putting yourself in their shoes.
It's about recognizing that everyone has their own unique experiences and perspectives, and those shape their actions.
Precisely. And this brings us to another powerful technique Carnegie highlights, letting the other person feel like the idea is theirs.
We touched on this earlier with the example of the sales manager who motivated his team by asking them what they expected of him. It's all about giving people a sense of ownership and agency.
Exactly. It's about guiding people toward a conclusion without forcing it on them. Carnegie argues that people are far more likely to support an idea if they feel like they've had a hand in creating it.
He uses the example of a man trying to sell fuel to a chain store executive. The executive was initially resistant to the salesman's pitch, which was filled with facts and figures. So the salesman shifted his approach.
He did. He told the executive about a debate he was participating in, where he was arguing in favor of chain stores. And then he asked for the executive's help with the debate, saying, "I'm anxious to win this debate, and I'll deeply appreciate whatever help you can give me."
So instead of trying to convince the executive directly, he made him feel like an expert who could contribute valuable insights.
Exactly. By framing it as a request for help, he appealed to the executive's ego and desire to be seen as knowledgeable and helpful. The executive, flattered by the request, readily provided information and insights.
It's a brilliant example of how to turn a sales pitch into a collaborative effort. By making the other person feel like they're part of the solution, you're much more likely to win them over.
Absolutely. Carnegie stresses that this principle can be applied in all sorts of situations, from parenting to politics.
It reminds us that people are more likely to support something if they feel like they've had a say in shaping it.
And building on this concept of understanding and respecting the other person's perspective, Carnegie emphasizes the importance of trying honestly to see things from their point of view.
We've talked about this before, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, but Carnegie takes it a step further.
He does. He stresses not just understanding the other person's perspective, but also being sympathetic to it. He even goes as far as to say, you deserve very little credit for being what you are. And remember, the people who come to you irritated, bigoted, unreasoning, deserve very little discredit for being what they are. Feel sorry for the poor devils, pity them, sympathize with them, say to yourself, there, but for the grace of God, go I.
That's a powerful statement. It's a call for compassion, for understanding that everyone is a product of their experiences, and those experiences can sometimes lead them to behave in the ways that we might not understand or agree with.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even people who seem difficult or unreasonable are doing the best they can with the tools they have. Carnegie illustrates this with the story of a man who was outraged by a company's careless mistake. Instead of yelling or demanding compensation, he took the time to understand the situation from the company's perspective.
He chose understanding over anger.
Precisely, and it turned out that the mistake was an honest oversight, not a malicious act. By showing understanding and compassion, he was able to resolve the issue amicably.
It's a reminder that sometimes a little empathy can go a long way.
Absolutely, and this principle applies to everyday interactions too. Carnegie uses the example of a husband who was constantly annoyed by his wife's gardening habits. He complained about the time she spent weeding and fertilizing.
That sounds familiar. My partner and I have had similar discussions about our differing approaches to housework.
It's a common scenario. But in this case, the husband realized that his wife genuinely enjoyed gardening, and he started to compliment her efforts instead of criticizing them.
That's a great example of how shifting your perspective and showing appreciation can change the dynamic of a relationship.
It is. They even started gardening together and both enjoyed it more as a shared activity. This reinforces the idea that even small acts of understanding and appreciation can significantly impact our relationships. It's about choosing kindness and empathy over judgment and criticism.
This segues perfectly into Carnegie's next principle: appeal to the nobler motives.
Right. We talked about this earlier with the examples of John D. Rockefeller Jr. and Cyrus H.K. Curtis. It's about tapping into people's better nature, inspiring them to act in ways aligned with their values.
It's about appealing to their desire to do good and make a positive difference.
Exactly. Carnegie believes that this approach is far more effective than trying to force people to do what we want. He illustrates this with the story of a photographer who was about to take pictures of a company's seemingly inefficient operations. He was planning to expose their wastefulness.
Sounds like he was about to have a field day, but then what happened?
An executive appealed to his sense of fairness, explaining that it was a new project and everyone was still learning. They weren't intentionally being wasteful, they were simply navigating a new process.
So instead of just focusing on the negative aspects, he provided context and appealed to the photographer's understanding.
Exactly. And the photographer, recognizing the nuances of the situation, decided not to take the pictures. This demonstrates how appealing to someone's better nature can be incredibly persuasive.
It's about helping them see the bigger picture and appealing to their sense of fairness and compassion.
Precisely. And Carnegie provides several examples of this principle in action, from resolving customer service disputes to motivating employees. He highlights that people are much more likely to respond positively or if they feel like they're contributing to something meaningful and aligned with their values.
It's a powerful reminder that we can achieve more by appealing to people's better angels. So what's your final takeaway for our listeners today? What's the one thing you hope they'll remember from our deep dive into how to win friends and influence people?
I'd say the most important message is that the key to winning friends and influencing people is being genuinely interested in others. You know, when you approach interactions with that sincere desire to understand and connect, amazing things can happen. You build trust, you create rapport, and it opens up possibilities you may have never imagined.
Beautifully said. It's not about manipulation. It's about the power of human connection. And that's something we can all cultivate.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope you've enjoyed our exploration of how to win friends and influence people. And remember, the journey to building stronger relationships and creating more positive and influential life starts with one step: being genuinely interested in others.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting.